Yo guys, what is up? Moxie here with the Diablo 4 video, and today we're talking about the new Warlock class coming to Diablo 4. Now, I got flown out to California to go to Blizzard HQ and play the Warlock for a few hours, chat with the devs, and learn about this upcoming expansion. Now, it's no secret that I really haven't covered Diablo 4 on this channel for quite a while. I played the game really hardcore for like the first few months, maybe to a year that it was out. I basically stopped when the Vessel of Hatred dropped with the Spiritborn, honestly, because build customization felt pretty stale. There was very few choices in your skill tree. Felt like there was a lot of uniques that were kind of like hard locked to your character. I would get bored relatively easily after leveling up my character and reaching endgame. There was a lot of things that just weren't really hitting anymore for me in Diablo 4, and so I stopped playing. And it was very cool that Blizzard reached out and asked me if I wanted to come try this new class because, I've been keeping an eye on D4. I've played every once in a while for some of the new season drops, but I figured I'd really jump back in and try the game and give it another shot when the Lord of Hatred comes out. So this video isn't sponsored by Blizzard. They're not paying me anything to make this video. However, they did pay for my flight and accommodations to go and try this out. And for you today, I've got some answers to maybe some questions you might have about the expansion, as well as my time playing the character and what I thought of the new skill tree systems and the endgame reworks and stuff like that. So I hope you enjoy. There's a lot of good here, but also some pretty large concerns. I'm going to tell you everything you need to know. Let's do this. So the first thing to talk about is the new reworked skill trees. Now, I only got to see the new skill trees of the Warlock class. I didn't get to see what they had done to Druid or Sork or anything like that. But every class is getting a totally new reworked tree that functions quite in similar ways, but different than how they worked in base game. So I kind of want to go over that first and kind of my opinions of these skill trees, because the limited skill trigs, or as trees, or as people joked, the skill twigs in Diablo are fairly build limiting. For example, if you played Diablo 3, you'd pick a skill and you usually have 5 augments that you could pick. But in Diablo 4, you only had 2 options. And so this is kind of the aspect of the game. While I liked the Warlock and I'm excited for it, being able to get tons of new skills, build crafting options on all of the classes is what I was personally most excited for. So the way that it works is you have a skill. By the way, the one crazy thing about this is there's no more passives in your skill tree. It's all skills. There is no passives, and there is no ultimate passive. So at the end of the tree, there was usually 5 options, sometimes more, of these kind of keystone passives. Those are all gone. And so the way that you build out your character and the way that you think about things are quite different, because there's no passives and there's no keystone passives. So if you hover over any skill, you'll have a base skill that you can spend up to 12 points in now. All skills are 12 points, so it's no longer 5. And once you pick that skill, you have kind of 3 augment choices. And these augments are much larger, kind of game-changing things. An example was for the Sork, you had Hydras, and those Hydras you could change to do AoE damage or fire a bunch of things, or you could turn it into a cryo skill. So those changed quite drastically. On the Warlock specifically, the Warlock has kind of 4 build playstyles or skill types, and you could change basically any skill into any other type, which was pretty crazy. To give you an example, this is Hell Fracture. You summon fires of hell to fracture the ground, dealing damage to enemies in the area. And for the kind of core augments, you had Lava Fissure. Hell Fracture creates lava fissures between each fracture, which bursts for 990 damage. There was also Eruption. Hell Fracture no longer explodes with each cast and instead creates 4 small fissures in front of you that erupt into Brimstone. Brimstone was kind of these chunks of lava that would usually explode. And then you had Fractured Abyss, which Hell Fracture now reaches to the Abyss, dealing damage and pulling enemies inwards. Hell Fracture is now an Abyss skill. So just kind of some examples. You could change it. You could have no explosions, small fractures, these fractures going in between things or change it to a pole skill with abyss things. And then on the side of every single skill, there's also kind of a more passive thing that you get to pick between. So this is additional fissures, health fractures explode an additional time or ramp up. Casting a basic skill increases the damage of your next health fracture by 40%, but also increases the cost by 25% up to 4 times. So if you're casting a bunch of basic skills, your next health fracture does a ton of extra damage. And so that is, you're still doing the same health fracture, but you can augment the way that it works or the amount of damage that it does. The other 2 augments were cost reduction. Casting health fracture reduces its cost by 25% until you cast a different skill. And volatility, standing within a health fracture explosion grants you volatility, which would kind of empower your skills. And now, at the end of this video, I will have kind of like a just section that shows every single skill and every single passive on Warlock. If you want to like slow it down and kind of go through each and every skill, that will be later in the video. But I just kind of wanted to give you an idea for this. So I like and I don't like this new skill tree, which is a bit of a bummer because I was really hoping I was going to love everything about this skill tree. But there's a few things that I don't love, and I kind of want to cover that. So the first is that these skills now rank up to 12, which is a whole lot more than 5. But with all these new things, you're getting a lot of new points. And you'll note for a lot of this gameplay, I was level like 40 here, with a max level being, I believe it was 70. And by the time I was level 40, because there's no passives, you can pick just about every skill with a main changing thing and its 2 passives, and dump 12 out of 12 points into your main skill and around 12 out of 12 points into most of your other skills by the time that you're level 40. Like I was level 40 and I didn't have a ton of points into my basic skill, but I basically had a ton of points into everything else, as this is kind of showing. But my issue with that is because the idea of a skill tree and an expanded skill tree like this is to give you tons of options, right? And I guess what I'm getting at is by the time I was like level 40, I felt like I had gotten everything that I cared about for my build, and the only thing to do was just to put random points into the skills to get them to like 12 out of 12. And I asked one of the designers there, and I was like, hey, like, I'm level 40. I've got 30 more points to do. What am I supposed to do with all these points? Like, is it intended that you're basically going to rank up everything to 12 out of 12? And they were like, yes, that is kind of the intention, is that you're just going to rank all of these skills up to 12 out of 12. And there's a caveat to that, which we'll talk about in a second. But my issue with that is, like, that eliminates the whole choice thing. One of the issues with Diablo 4's original skill trees is, like, a lot of times you'd just kind of have to dump points into things, even if you didn't really care for them, because, there wasn't that many options or choices to make. Now, they've expanded the skill tree so you have so many options, and you still have way more ways to augment and tweak your build and customize your build. I want to make that super clear. There is going to be way more ways to play and way more build depth with the skill tree, but I wish there was still like passives or something to spend these points in, besides just ranking up all of the skills to rank 12. And I think they increased the ranks from 0 to 5 specifically so you had a place to dump all these extra points at. And so to me, that's not really like choice making. You make all your choices from like level 1 to 30, and then from like 30 to 70, you know what I mean? You're just kind of like ranking up, going +1, +2, +3, +4. But there is a caveat to that I didn't get to see, that the devs reassured me is not as much of an issue as I'm thinking, but I still wanted to kind of like relay what my like initial impressions of this was to you. So the thing that they said is, because there's no passives now, the way that your gear and everything works is totally different. And there's going to be a lot more of gear that gives you the ability to cast certain skills automatically. And so if on this build and gear we had, we didn't like get to go and do progress. Like I played for like basically an hour and a half in a very set thing. Couldn't like enchant our weapons or like put the legendary aspects on our weapon. We couldn't really do any build crafting. We were kind of just like given a character and we could just do the gameplay. And so on that aspect, the skill system didn't seem like it was that crazy, like more build options, but so many dump points basically. But they said that when you're getting your gear later on, a lot of the times you're going to be getting gear that will auto cast certain skills for you. So you might cast Sigil of Summon on igniting an enemy, or different skills will be triggering from different ways, and then those triggered skills will then benefit from your extra additional skill points into them and the way that you augment them. So if I was to cast Sigil of Summon on like an ignite, then I would then want to put points into Sigil of Summons. Even if it wasn't in my bar, I would then want to put it into the augments and the passives for Sigil of Summons and level it up, because it's now part of my build. And there I'm going to have more of a way to like put those different points into different places. So it sounds like it's going to be pretty in-depth and pretty major for an increase to build crafting and customization. And it looks that way, but I did want to kind of tell you guys my concern, because that was my number one concern coming out of here, is like the skill tree is more depth, but it's still not quite hitting all the notes that I would like it to hit. And so that was kind of my initial impressions of the skill tree. So the next thing to talk about is the Warlock class itself. Now, the Warlock is a new kind of archetype for Diablo 4 and Diablo in general. They did just introduce it into Diablo 2. But normally, you're fighting demons and you would never want to like associate yourself with demons in Diablo. Well, the Warlock is very much associated with demons, but you are kind of controlling them rather than demons are controlling you. And you have this kind of like disrespect for demons almost, where you're just kind of like abusing them. And it leads to some very interesting play styles and aspects. I kind of want to go over the 4 main kind of pillars of the Warlock and its different play styles. So the first playstyle of Warlock, and you can kind of like associate these the same way that like Sork has like fire, lightning, and ice builds. These are the different kind of builds for the Warlock. And the first is a Legion build, which is very much focused on summoning demons, but also exploiting the deaths of demons to increase your own power. So in the Legion side, your core skill is Bombardment. By the way, there's a lot of other skills that you can turn into Legion skills, for example. But Bombardment is like the Legion skill where, as I said, you're like abusing demons. You are literally smashing demons into the ground to deal damage. And so you're just like flinging demons at enemies. It's pretty crazy, but very cool, and kind of like plays into the style of this like Legion commander. The next skill was a defensive skill called Wall of Agony, where you'd summon and fuse frenzied demons into a line for 8 seconds, and then those demons would block damage for you. There was also Rampage, where you would summon a rampaging brute that would smash enemies and eviscerate them. Eviscerate's the new like Warlock mechanic that allows you to instantly deal a certain amount of enemies bleeding life and then proc bleeds on them. So you can have all these sources of bleed or eviscerate, where you're like instantly procking a lot of their bleeding life and then bleeding them. And then that bleed duration, if you eviscerate them again, will proc a ton of that bleeding life. Basically more of a snappy burst damage associated with a bleed playstyle. And then the other skill I wanted to call it was the Sigil of Summons, which allows you to create a ritual that binds demons and increases the duration of your summons. And if you kill 8 enemies or demons within the ritual circle, you get to summon an additional demon, which does a bunch of extra damage and will rampage around hitting enemies. The ultimate skill for the like Legion playstyle was Field of Abaddon, that allows you to summon a massive fiend that attacks enemies, dealing extra damage each swipe. And I had spec'd into it, so if an enemy survives more than 5 hits from the Field of Abaddon, then each subsequent hit increases its damage versus that target by 2% and extends its lifetime by 2 seconds up to 60 seconds. So basically, you could just have this thing out for like the whole boss fight if you wanted to. The next playstyle was the Vanguard, where you ride atop a hellhound, transforming into a demon and bringing fiery destruction as the spearhead of a demonic force. Some skill highlights to call out for the Vanguard were Blazing Scream. This is a core skill. It's actually probably the favorite core skill that I use, and a lot of the content creators that I talked to, this was also their favorite core skill. This sends out a demon skull that does damage as it travels. I had some augments on it so that it shot out skulls that seeked enemies and did damage, and it also gained increased damage and speed based off of my movement speed. Basically, you'd click this skull and it would go and travel out, and it would hit a ton of things and like literally clear like screens ahead of you. So that was really, really cool. There was also the Sigil of Chaos, which would allow you to create a destructive ritual that would grant you volatility. Volatility is another buff that empowers your like Hellfire skills. And so if you're playing this like Hellfire Vanguard skill, you'd always want to be volatile because all of your skills would just do more damage. And then in the Sigil of Chaos, if you killed enemies, you'd fuel the ritual and increase your chance for enemies to explode on death. So as long as you have this ritual out, if you're fighting a bunch of enemies, they'll just kind of keep popping and exploding. And you could have a modifier on Sigil of Chaos so that it would follow you around like an aura, rather than it just being kind of in a random place. So as long as you are killing enemies around you, they're just going to be exploding in hellfire. There was also Infernal Breath. This one was sweet. You can summon a demonic head that breathes fire on enemies, and you could get it to have like additional heads, and at the end of its duration it would cause these big explosions, just more fire and craziness. And then the like one of the big skills for the Vanguard, the ultimate, would allow you to transform into a demon, and while you're in demon form, you get like different skill variants, which will allow you to do special demon skills. And then you could also, for example, whenever you would leave this demon form, there was modifiers that would allow you to like increase your maximum resources and your resource generation, but basically just transform into a demon. The next playstyle to call out is the Mastermind. I really liked this. Basically, it was the more like shadowy version of the Warlock. The description is that you bind foes and demons to your will, filling the battlefield with terror from within a cloak of abyssal shadows. So some highlight skills of the Mastermind playstyle, which, by the way, very kind of like summoning things from the ground, like claws and abyssal terrors to come and like torture your enemies. So the first was Dread Claws, that allowed you to summon these shadow claws. They would like come burst out of the ground and do a bunch of damage. And the other thing that's kind of going on with the like Mastermind, like Shadow Abyss thing, is you had a lot of interactions with shadow form, which allows you to move through enemies unhindered, meaning like you can't like collide with them. And you'd also gain stealth. And I found while I was playing this playstyle, had some pretty good survivability because you were like in stealth a lot of the time. So a lot of times you were just attacking enemies and they weren't targeting you. There was also Nether Step, which would put you into the nether and grant you a shadow form, which would grant you 100% increased movement speed for 3 seconds. There was an augment that would give this another additional 50% increase in duration. And I imagine a lot of builds are going to end up using this just because you go invisible and get a bunch of movement speed. So that felt really great. There was also Profane Sentinel, which allowed you to summon a demonic eye that would beam enemies. And the Sentinel eye had a lot of things where you could like either make it just kind of hit one enemy and stack up a bunch of damage on them, or you could have it do more so of like cone attacks and hit more enemies, but for less damage. It's kind of an example of a lot of the things you can do with these different skills if you want to spec them out for more of like a single target skill, or if you want them to be more of an AoE mobber. And then the ultimate skill was the Terror Swarm, which will allow you to summon terror from the depths that did a bunch of damage and spewed swarms at enemies. And all of these different skills, once again, like these were some of the highlights that they like showed to us, but you could also, grab the Vanguard fire skill and turn it into an abyss skill. And the last playstyle to call out is the Ritualist, which allows you to empower hellfire and abyss rituals with demonic energy to bring calamity and explode your enemies. the like previous kind of playstyles that we talked about all had kind of like these like sigils that they could summon. The Ritualist really like emphasizes kind of that sigil and like summoning ritual playstyle. So the skills that they set up for us on Ritualist were Hell Fracture, which we talked about earlier. Basically, you can split open the earth and spew out a bunch of fire damage and have all these fractures split out towards more enemies, pull them in, cause explosions. There was also Dark Prison, which created a totem which would chain to enemies, and then they like wouldn't be able to escape. Basically, they kind of get like pulled in. And then when you cast Dark Prison, you could refresh and create a link to your last prison. So you'd make a totem and then like make another totem, and then enemies that crossed the line between the totems would get pulled into the prisons. And it would also gain you additional charge. You could kind of set up like an area of these things that would just not let enemies escape and keep them chained in. There's also the Sigil of Subversion, which creates a ritual that hexes enemies. Hexes or a hex on an enemy increases your crit chance up on them up to 45%. And then when you kill enemies or demons within this ritual, so like you could kill enemies or like summon your own demons and kill them in this, you could send out shadowy trails from this that would also grant you shadow form, giving you that stealth. And then there was also the Apocalypse Ultimate skill. This was one of the most visually impressive skills, in my opinion, across all the classes. You create this huge fire sigil that after a few seconds detonates and does a ton of damage. Very, very cool visual looking skill. So that's kind of the 4 playstyles in a rough summary. Obviously, just scratches the surface. This doesn't touch uniques. And once again, I only got to play this class for like an hour and a half in a very restrained area. So not too much experimentation to be done, but it does seem like there's a lot of experimentation that you can do, mainly because every skill can be changed into any other type of skill. If you want to use the like Abyss skills as Vanguard skills, you can make them and do fire damage. And there's also a bunch of different mechanics around with the Warlock, from your shadow forms to your hexes, to your volatility to empower your fire skills. There was the like eviscerate for bleed, a whole lot of new keywords and terminologies. There was also brimstone. I think a full brimstone build is going to be something that's viable. Brimstone was these kind of like rocks that you could summon that were volcanic and they would explode. And I imagine there was different skills to summon even more brimstone and make brimstone do more damage. So kind of this like explosive playstyle. But overall, thoughts on the Warlock, I thought it was very visually flashy. I thought it was cool. It's not really like a personal build fantasy that I like usually go for. However, I could definitely see myself playing like an Abyss or Vanguard playstyle build. It seemed quite cool. Now, the other thing to talk about is kind of the end game, and I didn't get to see any of the end game. I didn't get to play any of it, but I did get to talk with their creative director about the end game and kind of what they're going for. And one of the coolest things about this talk with the creative director was, you know, they were like, for the most part, very, very aware of kind of the shortcomings of Diablo 4 and weren't like afraid to admit things that they wanted to do better. And that's kind of where a lot of this stuff is going to be headed. Is not only we've got new skill trees for customization, but they're doing big changes to the gear. They're going to be moving, because a lot of the things on gear were like, you know, for example, on Druid, if you wanted to play a pulverize build, you had to get a thing that would turn pulverize into a bear skill, or sorry, an earth skill. And all of those kind of like very restrictive gear aspects are going to get changed due to the new skill trees, because now if you want to make pulverize an earth skill, you just click it. You just click it in your skill tree. And so the actual gear is all basically getting reworked, and there's going to be putting what they said as a lot of the power of the keystones, a lot of the powers of the passives into the gear. So they're kind of hitting it from both sides. In addition to that, there's also going to be the Kanai cube, which they're adding for more like build crafting. and crafting of items. They're also adding set bonuses in a very smart way, in my opinion. So set bonuses are returning sets absolutely dominated Diablo 3's meta. Basically, you'd pick up a set that give you like 15,000% increased damage with a certain action, and you would just wear that set. Yes, there was a little bit more depth to that, but sets, like, I think hurt kind of the loot and build crafting economy in Diablo 3, and so they're doing sets again in Diablo 4. They're returning, but as like an amulet kind of slot. They're not actual pieces of gear that you're wearing. You can pick and mix and match different set bonuses, but it's totally separate from the like normal gear that you're wearing. So that should also help empower playstyles that maybe weren't super valuable before, because now if you get a set bonus to do a thing that didn't have much support before, now it might have a way more damage and way more support for that kind of playstyle. So that will also increase build crafting and customization. And then for the endgame depth, they found that players weren't really having a lot of direction for what to do. The last thing to talk about is endgame. They are kind of revamping the endgame, but also allowing you to kind of like tailor make it more to yourself. So basically, they're adding a new kind of atlas or skill tree to all of the endgame activities that allow you to interact and add risk and reward to the different endgame systems. And so kind of an example of this that they gave me is if you're running a pit tier, for example. Normally in a pit tier, you'd have to clear a certain amount of enemies, and then you'd go fight the boss. When you kill the boss, you're done. But, for example, you could have this crazy, insane butcher randomly show up every once in a while in your pit tiers, and if you kill that butcher, you're just done. You get all your rewards as if you'd beaten the boss, as if you killed the enemies. It would spawn in pretty early. So it's a way to like kind of expedite pit progression, but if your build was strong enough to take it. They said if you died against this butcher, though, your pit would end. Normally when you die, you lose a little bit of time. You need to keep going. This is you just end. And so there's a lot of kind of those things where, like, for example, in the Helltides, maybe the chest all cost way more Helltide resources, but they give way better rewards. And so if you want to interact with these new systems and like expand on your end game, you have to do war plans, and war plans are kind of a way to give you different activities and different direction. So like if I want to level up Helltides, I will get Helltide missions, and I'll have to go do certain things in the Helltides, and that will reward me with the skill points to then go make my Helltides more rewarding. They didn't, when I asked them about it, this isn't going to mean that you are just doing Helltides, and that's like your whole thing. They're not kind of aiming for that. They don't want it to be a little bit like PoE, where you're like just doing Legion or just doing Breach or something like that. But it is going to be a way to kind of augment the different endgame activities, make them more difficult, but make them more rewarding. So on paper, it's sounding pretty good. Didn't get to mess around with this, so I can't like give you my opinions on it. But hopefully it works out. Guys, that's going to do it for the video. I'm going to leave you with a clip of all of the skills in the Warlock tree, if you want to pause and look at all of those, and just kind of my final thoughts while that is showing. Overall, things are looking good. I definitely plan on diving into the Diablo 4 expansion. I don't know if these endgame systems and updates that they're going to add are going to allow players to grind for weeks in Diablo 4. I know that's kind of been a big thing, is you can play for like a day or two and kind of be done with the season and max out your character. Hopefully they will. However, the thing that I'm most looking forward to is playing builds and making new things that really haven't existed before. I think the new skill trees, even though they do have some flaws, should allow for some genuine new build crafting and new ways to play, especially with all the new kind of gear and the revamps, as well as the set bonuses. So as like a build crafter, I'm really excited for the new season. I think we can make some awesome stuff. And hopefully this is a big step to put Diablo 4 really in the right direction. And to be honest, from what I've heard, Diablo 4 has been going in the right direction for a while. I'll probably jump in for this new season for a little bit, but I do plan on hitting the expansion when it comes out pretty hard. And obviously I'll kind of give you guys my opinions on it when it comes out. But once again, thanks to Blizzard for flying me out and letting me play, give you guys some opinions and some overviews of the Warlock. Once again, this video isn't sponsored by them. But yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll catch you on the next one. Take care. Peace.